Greetings. Thank you for joining Comforting Hearts Conversations. My name is Ann Vlahos, author of To Die For, The Gifts of Being Present Through Loss and Grief. And today I'm joined by my dear friend, Jess Steinman. Back in May of 2007, Jess founded In Touch with Spirit, and she's a psychic medium. So I have her on here today to help us learn more about that. In addition to being a medium, she also is an intuitive tarot card reader and teacher, an integrated energy therapy master instructor, an advanced Reiki practitioner, and a practitioner of healing, crystal healing, and total energetics, founded through the science and art of transformation. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you joined, and I'm very excited to talk with you today. I got to say I've learned a few things about you when I just read your bio, and I'm really impressed. I had no idea that you really bring such breadth and depth to the work that you're doing. So I'm looking forward to our conversation here.
Me as well. It's very fun. I find that every technique I learn and every modality that I delve into, I tend to bring that and the experience from that to not only to my clients, but especially when I'm doing the mediumship piece. I find that each experience that I have, each modality I learn, just allows me to go deeper within the mediumship and be a clearer channel. So I'm always grateful.
Oh, that's neat. So I want to talk a little bit about how you and I met. It was definitely a unique meeting. I can honestly say that I hadn't been to a medium and hadn't really spoke to one before I had spoke to you. And so to just give a little bit of a backstory, as I was writing my book, there were transcripts that had to be transcribed. And the publisher, at the time, Jess was working with the publisher. And so I'd love you to tell this from your side, if you can kind of go into the story for us.
Sure. So I was working for this publisher doing transcription, and I had been doing transcription for probably a few years for them at that point, 4 or 5 years. And when I was ever told that I'm going to be doing this story and sort of just basic background on it, I said, I'm open to it. And what was really interesting is that as I was transcribing your story, I found that where I was at in my personal life and some things I was going through personally, watching family, my mom with a bladder cancer diagnosis, had been in remission for a few years and having had that come back, and different things that I was going through just in my own personal experience. Other than that, it was like, wow, I wish somebody had said these things to me or had told me that when I was initially going through this, because that would have been really helpful. So it was, for me, it was just such a synchronistic connection. And when the transcriptions were all done, I just remember saying to the publisher, can you put me in touch with Anne, because I really need to talk to her and thank her for this, because it was so profound.
Oh, and I was overwhelmed. I had no idea. And then for me, it felt like another synchronicity as well, too. And I know for me, I was thrilled when we had an opportunity to talk. I didn't know your background. And probably one of the things that you did for me was to assuage my number one fear of writing the book, which I do write about in the forward, and that was that I didn't want to violate the memories of my parents, and by telling this story and having you say that this was part of a soul contract and that they were very positive about it. Really, just that was kind of like the big deep breath that I needed on that. So bless then and now.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like they still are so excited about it. Yay, we're so glad you did this, and we're so proud of you for doing it.
Oh, it's great to hear. And I understand why what you do is so valuable, but I have a couple of questions for you that I'd love to help people understand, how did you get here? What goes on and things that they can learn, because I feel that it could be a tool for some folks that is very holistic and also practitioner driven. So the first one is like, how about like your backstory? Like, how did you even know? Okay, so you started your business in 2007. So you've been doing this for over 12 years. You know it, but how did you first know it?
Right. So long story very short. I was actually a music education major in college. So this was not even in my wheelhouse. A lot of mediums and healers say, oh, when I was younger, I saw my angels. I felt my loved ones around me. I loved crystals. I couldn't really say I had any of that going on. I was pretty skeptical. I was born and raised, my dad was born and raised Jewish. My mom was born and raised Catholic, converted when she married my dad, but we kept the holidays and everything kind of growing up. So I had holidays sort of from both sides of the family. But this was not something we talked about. My parents were pretty skeptical. And this was not something that we really dove into. I was a tremendous skeptic. Like, all psychics and mediums were frauds, so tell me about them. Don't want to hear about them. The
Right.
only thing that I could say that I had, sort of intuitively speaking, was when I would meet somebody, I would know instantly whether they were a good person or not. And, you know, as an adult, we don't think much about that. But as a teenager, when all of your friends like somebody and you don't, and you can't explain why, makes you really popular.
Oh
So,
boy.
you know, every time I would be right on, and they would come back to me, whether it was a few weeks or a few months or a few years later, and say, how did you know? I don't know, I just knew. But I just thought it was reading people's body language. So I kind of dismissed it and didn't think much of it. Went off to college, took a 6-year program, music education with 2 concentrations, one in viola, one in voice. Burnt out halfway through the program and came home on a medical leave. And about 2 months after I came home, 2 or 3 months, my paternal grandmother passed. She was my last living grandparent, and she was somebody I had a huge connection with. She was very, very pivotal in my upbringing. And so when she passed, it really sent me on a soul-searching journey. And a couple months after she passed, I had a very dear friend from high school who was going to school on Cape Cod. And she said to me, I have to take you to this really cool store that I found just before I left school for the summer. And she said, it's a metaphysical store. And I said, a meta what? A meta who? And she goes, it's a metaphysical store. Oh, you know, they have candles there, and they have books, and they have crystals. Oh, and they do readings. And I'm like, oh, no. We're not. No. And she said, hey, if nothing else, will be a nice day trip to the beach. Like, okay, fine. So we went, we spent the day at the beach. We had a wonderful time. I was hoping, because I was seeing a lot of the stores close up around 6 o'clock when we were leaving to come back home. And sure enough, she said, oh no, stores open till 8. Our reading's at 6:30. Let's go in. And she went and had her reading first. And I was creeping around the store like a fish out of water. I felt so out of my element. You know, there were these beautiful crystals there and healing stones. And they had all these books on energy healing and all that sort of stuff. And I just felt so not in my element. Then I go up and have my reading. And the woman did get my grandmother, I will say. But I had to explain the reading away. I said, oh no, my friend must have told you. And of course, being on the other side of the table now, I know that nobody's going to come in for their reading and pay me to tell me about their friend that's coming in after them.
Right.
But, you know, again, I was so skeptical, I had to explain it away. So fast forward a few months later, there was a show called Crossing Over with John Edward on TV. And a lot of people watched it at that time. They received messages and comfort from what he was bringing through. I watched it to make fun of it. I said, there's got to be something they're not telling us. And, you know, watched it, couldn't find anything, but kept watching it anyway because I was determined. So about a little less than a year after I came home from college, I just was lost. I'd had my set of firsts, the first holidays without my grandmother. We all know how the firsts are when somebody passes. It's trying to find your new way. And I just couldn't. I was feeling really lost. I knew I didn't want to teach music, but I didn't know what I really wanted to do. I was working a retail job at the time. I was just trying to figure out where I was going next. And so January of 2003, I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. And I tried 3 times in one day to take my own life. And every time, something, or I believe someone, got in my way. And what finally happened is that night, after chatting with a friend who just happened to call me, you know, she just was thinking of me, hadn't talked to me in 6 months, and then said, I don't know why, I just felt like I had to call you. And in that moment of talking with her and telling her what I was feeling and opening up to her, she said, the good news is you can't go any lower than you are right now. It can only go up from here. So why don't you go to bed? Give me a call in the morning. I promise things will look different. I didn't quite believe her, but I was willing to do it. And I'm not saying the next day that everything was sunshine and rainbows, but it was just enough of a crack in the foundation to let some light start to come in. So following, you know, the next few months and so, I would have different synchronistic things happening that I would sort of write off as coincidence. And November of 2003, went to a seminar with a medium named Suzanne Northrop. And Suzanne guided us through a meditation to connect with our loved ones on the other side. Now, I had tried to meditate every which way, had no success whatsoever. And yet something, just the moment was right. And in the moment of being in this meditation with the group, there was my grandmother, clear as day. She was well. She'd been very sick before she passed. She was well again. Her hair was permed. Her makeup was perfect. Everything was just the way I remembered her from when I was little. And she said to me, "There's nothing to be afraid of," because I had a huge fear of death. And when it's your time, a long time from now, we will all be here to meet you. And I said, "What do you mean we?" And she stepped aside, and there was my mom's father who had passed before I was born. And there was my German Shepherd who passed when I was 15. And so I went from being this total skeptic non-believer to having this incredible experience and going, what the heck just happened to me?
Wow.
So reading every book I could get my hands on, taking every class I could. So never thinking I was going to actually go into this, okay? Like this was not something I really thought. I still thought I might go back to music. Or thinking, well, maybe retail. Who knows what was going to happen? Well, what ended up happening is as I took each class, so for example, I started with tarot because the cards were something tangible. I could get my hands on them. I could see them. I could feel them. And in the tarot class was somebody who taught Reiki. In the Reiki class was somebody who taught crystal healing. And every class seemed to bring me closer to something.
Oh, wow.
And I actually got to I actually experienced a small group reading with Suzanne, where my grandmother and a few other relatives came through. And so at that point, the skepticism was gone, but I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And the more I dove into this world, the more things started to open up. So about a year after starting to read the cards, we're now into 2005, March or so, 2005. I had been reading the cards for about a year or so, and those on the other side started to show up. I went, oh no, I don't want this. And the more I said no, the more they showed up.
Oh my.
The go away, the louder they got.
Oh my.
So finally, after about 6 months of this and fighting it, I said, okay, Spirit, you clearly are seeing something for me that I'm not seeing for myself. If you really want me to do this, show me, guide me to the teachers, guide me to the people that will show me how to do it. And so sure enough, 2 weeks later, ask me you shall receive. I get an email from Hay House. Learn to connect with the spirit world workshop with John Holland in Boston next month. And wow. I went to the workshop, and at the end of the day, John pulled me up in front of the group and had me read the group because he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
Wow.
And so I went, okay, message received. I knew I wasn't ready to leave my retail job yet. I had the benefits and all that stuff. So I said, okay, I'm not ready for that. But I opened up and I kind of hung up my shingle at that point. I was already doing card readings. I was doing a little bit of mediumship, but at that point, I really more earnestly hung out my shingle. And then a couple of years later, I knew it was time to put a website out there. And that's really when I say my business started. It was 2007. I had been reading for a couple of years before then. But in 2007, I said, okay, it's time to get a website out there. And there was a friend of mine who developed a website. She said, so what do you want to call your business? And I said, well, I would like something to do with the spiritual work, but I'd also like something to do with the healing touch, the energy work that I do. And so we were, of course, you know, looking for what domains were free, what names.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so we're trying to find, you know, we're like Spirit's Touch. Okay, that's taken. Touching Spirit, that's taken. And so we kept going through all these things. Nothing was fitting. And she emailed me the next morning. She goes, how about In Touch with Spirit? And I went, that's it. Yes, let's take it. And what it went from being at that time of, you know, something with the energy healing and the spirit connection, I've actually grown into my business name, meaning that what I really consider myself to do now is help people connect with spirit in whatever way is right for them. So sometimes it's connecting with the spirit of a loved one. Sometimes it's connecting with that spirit that connects all of us, you know, God, source, creator, whatever you call it, connecting with that spirit that really taps into all of us. Or then sometimes it's connecting with your higher self, you know, meditating and really connecting with that part of you that does see the bigger picture, that higher consciousness. So that's what I feel my job is, to be that bridge for others to connect.
Huh.
So as I've connected them, it's helped me get stronger in my own connection too. So that's as I say, long story made as short as possible.
That's really neat. And it's, you know, it's, it's interesting to see how, you know, how the path kind of opens up. And I think it probably opened up at the speed that was probably perfect for you.
Absolutely, yes.
So I'm sure you have many folks that either come to see you for a private session or know that you also do group sessions. What's like the most common reasons why people are coming? What are the biggest reasons why they come?
A lot of times the biggest question I get is my loved one okay? That's the biggest thing that people want to know. Is my loved one okay? And, you know, whether it's they passed from, it can be any number of reasons, whether they passed from a long illness, whether they passed suddenly, unexpectedly. The question is still the same. Are they okay? My answer is always, they are fine. We're in the harder spot here. We're left to deal with the grief and the missing them and everything that comes with that. They are just fine. My belief is that the other side, heaven, whatever you call it, the other world, it's love, it's light, it's joy. They're totally fine over there. They're having a grand old time doing the things they love in a different sense, not in a physical way like we do it here. But, you know, if they love golfing, they're golfing over there. If they love fishing, they're fishing. If they like to cook, they're cooking. Whatever they like to do here, they're doing there. Sometimes, if they had a really intense life, they're just chilling out and relaxing and taking it easy.
Yeah.
You know, and so they're fine over there. We're in the harder spot. And my work is not about them. They're okay. It's about those that are left here.
Huh. And so what's more unusual reasons why people connect with you?
You know, sometimes it's not so much about connecting with a loved one. Sometimes it's, I just feel confused. I feel like I have a million things coming at me and I just need somebody to kind of stop the spinning top and put me back in the, you know, the grounded and centered path. Especially, I've noticed that more in the last couple of years. A lot of times we're just so bombarded with everything nowadays, between electronics and between, you know, just sort of news and all these different things going on. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in just day-to-day life. And so the thing that people seem to be coming to me for now, yes, to connect with loved ones, but also just help me get a clearer picture on what's going on. Help me to see the forest through the trees.
Ah, there you go.
And what is happening here.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to more of the mediumship part. So I can imagine, like, I've watched some of those shows too, like with John Edwards or different folks, and I've always found Long Island Medium. I mean, they're all, you know, there's a few that are more accessible to see, and there's always sometimes some really interesting stories. I've even had friends who have been at some of those that have some pretty powerful stories. Is it possible for you, without names, to kind of share a story or two that might have really touched your heart?
Absolutely, and it's a story that I use frequently when I am doing group readings, because I tell people that those on the other side know who is supposed to get the message. And a lot of times people come to my group readings and they say, well, I've paid my such and such amount and I want to connect with my whoever and I want them to tell me A, B, C, and D. Well, that's not how it works. And so one of my favorite stories to use is about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. I was doing a group of about 20 to 25 people, and this young couple was in the audience, was sitting right in front of me, and they were probably, I would say, early 30s, maybe late 20s, early 30s, and usually I tend to hear, is the way I get my messages, but sometimes I will see things as well, and I was seeing between the two of them this young girl, maybe about 8 or so years old, 7 or 8 years old, in a little pink tutu, long hair, and hearing, tell mommy I'm okay, tell mommy I'm okay. And this couple seemed a little young to have a child that was that much older, but I said, okay, you know what, I'll go with it. And again, I've learned to get out of the way when I get something and just give the message as I receive it. And so I said to them, there was this young girl standing between you, and I explained what I was seeing. And I said, I just need to tell you, tell mommy I'm okay. Well, the woman starts sobbing. And the man is not really saying anything. He's writing things down. And so then I go on and I deliver a few more messages from her. And then I felt both of their parents come through, both sets of parents. And they said, congratulations on the upcoming wedding. And I said, okay. You know, it didn't quite all make sense to me, but again, I just delivered the messages I was receiving. Well, the next day I get an email. And the woman said, we were just so blown away, we couldn't tell you this last night. But I had purchased tickets to this event about 2 months before it was supposed to happen. And I was supposed to go with a friend of mine. They taught together, and she said we were supposed to go together. And what ended up happening is her friend's daughter had leukemia and passed 3 weeks before the event. And she said, I can't go, because if my daughter comes through, I'll be a mess. If she doesn't come through, I'll be a mess. Either way, I can't handle it. Go and take your fiance, get your parents' blessing on your wedding, and I'll connect when the time is right. Well, the little girl knew that mommy was supposed to be there and get the message.
Wow.
So clearly, the little girl used the friend to come through and then allowed their parents to come through.
Wow.
That's one of my favorite stories of they know who's supposed to get the message.
I can imagine that gives an incredible sense of comfort to people. Have you seen it change people's grief patterns? Because I know that that's another thing that I'm hearing a lot as I do my outreach to people, that sometimes there's a real extended period of grief, especially when it's something like a child.
Absolutely. I find that, well, what I tell people is that mediumship is not a cure for the grieving process. You know, we all have to go through it. Even when I lose somebody, and I've had a lot of losses in the last couple of years of friends and clients and people that have passed, I still have to go through the grieving process. There's a really dear friend of mine who just passed in November, and I found myself the other night, she just popped into my mind, and I just started sobbing because I just missed being able to pick up the phone and call her. And it, you know, again, it doesn't get rid of the process, so to speak, of grieving. That's something we all have to walk through. But a mediumship connection, a session, can really help people in their grieving process. By knowing that their loved one is okay and still around them, it can help them navigate that path and come to more of that space of acceptance. And yes, there's still going to be the waves, whether it's a few weeks, a few years, a few months later, it doesn't really matter. There's still going to be those waves. But knowing that their loved one is okay, that they're still around them, it can really transform the process.
Give some peace.
Exactly. To have those little signs and hellos from the other side can be really just a wonderful gift in the process too.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned an interesting thing that, you know, you had a friend and as well as other people pass away. I've always wondered, do mediums use their gift for themselves?
So I would say yes, to a certain degree. It's a little bit different because there's that personal connection. There's that emotional connection. And so sometimes the emotions can, I don't know if get in the way is the right way of phrasing it, but it can make it a little bit harder to be open to receiving. Mm-hmm. But what I find is that those on the other side, they get clever. They use other people to get through.
Oh, so, interesting.
Yeah. So, you know, sometimes I will be really thinking about someone or missing someone, and then I'll have a friend tell me about a story, and they'll talk about, for example, white roses are a sign that my grandmother gives me quite a bit from the other side. And so it's like, they'll say, oh, well, you know, my husband gave me the most beautiful bouquet of white roses, or, you know, or I'll see I'll be watching TV and a commercial will come on and, you know, there's a bunch of white roses on there. And so it's like they find ways to get through that might not be that direct connection like I hear it for somebody else, but they still show up.
Yeah. So in doing this, because, you know, I mean, obviously we still grieve, but what has this gift done for you as far as you coming to terms with, you know, the transition of life?
Well, like I said earlier, I used to have a huge fear of death. I do not have that fear anymore. I know that, you know, I still have a lot of living that I want to do and a lot of wonderful things that I want to experience here. But I know that when it's my time, I'm going to be met by all my loved ones that have gone before me, and that it's going to be a big reunion, a big party. We're going to go to the pub and have a drink together and have a great time. That has transformed that for me. I would say that it also makes me incredibly grateful and humble, because my clients are, and it makes me choke up a little bit, because I see clients that go through these tremendous losses, children, spouses of many, many, many years, siblings, friends, whoever, that is really meaningful to them. And sometimes they come to me fresh in grief. I always tell people, give yourself time to go through your grieving process, but sometimes it's really fresh. And to be able to say, wow, there but for the grace of God go I. Like, I am so blessed that I'm able to hear and deliver these messages and be the conduit. My clients always bring me back to that space of humility and grace. So
Wow.
I'm very grateful for that.
Wow. And so I know like the first chapter of my book, I talk about the news, right? And when you hear the news, how does that actually change there for you then? When, like, so for instance, we just talked about a friend, right? That's a huge loss at our age, right? I mean, that's, and it's fresh. So do you recall what that moment was like for you?
It was, for me, I actually found out through a mutual friend, and it was really interesting because this friend that passed had been diagnosed with ALS a few years ago, but 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was. And excuse me, the last time we had connected, he said it'll probably be the last time I talk with you because, my speech is starting to go, and that was again about 2 years ago or so. And so when I heard that news initially, it was this gasp, like we all have, that sort of sucker punch to the gut of, oh my gosh, she's not physically here. And then once I took a few breaths and I kind of grounded and processed, I went, yeah, but she's free of that body that wasn't serving her anymore. And I was able to kind of immediately take that sort of sucker punch feeling, breathe through it, and then say, but she's okay. And then I was able to go into my grieving and say, yeah, but I'm still really sad and I miss her. And sort of have that back and forth. So I would have that really intense wave, but then I'd have that moment of grace of knowing she's okay, she's in a better place. And still walking through my process and honoring it, but also recognizing, yeah, but she doesn't have to deal with that stuff that she was dealing with for the last 2 years.
Right. And so I sense there's a nugget of gold there. What's your personal grounding process during that time? What's your process?
Yeah, so for me, I always come back to the breath. Just stop and take a deep breath, or take a few deep breaths, and really kind of feel myself in my body, feel my feet on the floor, and just take a few moments and be with whatever emotion is coming up. I may not like the emotion that's coming up, but be with it. If I'm sad and I'm missing somebody, be in that sadness. If I'm angry that they're no longer here, be in that anger, whatever it is. Just be fully present in it rather than trying to escape it. And that for me is very grounding, because I think sometimes when those emotions are intense, human nature is going to want to escape that. So if I can just stop and take a deep breath and be in it, it's much, much better overall.
Yeah, that's tremendously powerful what you just said, because I think I do something that's slightly different. I put my hand on my heart, because I feel like your breath and your heart remind you of, the love that you are, and that you're alive, right? And that needs to be at that time reaffirmed, I think. But also as we go through. It is really important to release the emotions as well, right? We're doing workshops that talk about the news, and as you speak about different words have different resonances in your body, and if you're not really honest about that, and you let that emotion build and don't release, that it also causes some really pretty intense physical symptoms. Whether it's neck pain, back pain, chest pain, it can be a lot. It can really surface itself in quite a few ways. So that healthy release is excellent advice.
Yeah, for me, it's been tremendously helpful. I mean, last year with all of those losses that I went through, I found at the beginning of this year I was having some really bad back pain, and it's like, well, of course, I'm feeling that loss of support. So once I did that, I was able to go to my chiropractor, who's also a gifted energy healer, and say to him, okay, let's work on this structurally, but let's also work on it energetically and emotionally. And I had a big release. I had an ugly cry in his office, but I felt so much better because, yes, we dealt with the structural piece, but then I also dealt with the grieving piece too. So it takes healing to a whole other level.
Yeah, I think it's really important to continue to check in with yourself, to be honest about that. So that's another good point as well too, to be present when it happens, but also to continue to check in with yourself and am I physically feeling okay as well as emotionally? So that's great. Wondering if you have any parting advice to anybody who might be a little, concerned about, that interface to reaching out to someone who's a medium for assistance to help with that connection.
Well, I always tell people, when the time is right, because there's a stirring in your heart that it just doesn't go away. When it's the right time to connect. I really tell people that you have to feel it, because if you're forcing it, or somebody says, well, you should go see a medium, and it's forced like that, it's not going to work. But if you really just kind of take some time and go within and say, okay, is it the right time for me to connect? You're going to get that feeling. You're going to get that pull. And I understand, having been that skeptic, I actually love it when skeptics come to see me, because I say, okay, let's sit down. I was where you were, 12 years ago, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. Let's sit and talk about this. And, I really help people to put their fears aside first, because that's really what skepticism builds from, is from fear. So if we can put some of the fears aside, then we can get to the heart of the matter, and that's when some really powerful experience.
Yep. So one last thing, if anyone would like to connect with you, is there a website or emails or anything that you'd like to convey that we can offer?
Yep, absolutely. My website is intouchwithspirit.com. It's all spelled out. And my email is really simple from that. It's just jess@intouchwithspirit.com.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Jess, so much for joining us today on Comforting Hearts Conversations, and thank you to all of our guests too, who joined as well. We love to take on that tough subject and break it down for you so that you can also find some hope through your own path, through loss and grief. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Jess, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.